There was a time when Betty Crocker taught millions of Americans how to pack a lunch that could survive until noon and still taste like someone cared. Those recipes are gone now.
Now this is a very easy recipe, and it's an all-year-round recipe.
Tomato aspic, the church basement, summer 1962. Mrs. Wellington's tomato aspic sat on the buffet table like a red traffic light, warning and attracting in equal measure. It quivered when people walked by, as if it were alive, afraid, knowing what was coming. This wasn't just lunch. It was edible architecture that jiggled. Nothing says lunch in 1955, quite like a quivering red mass of jellied tomato juice pretending to be salad. Tomato aspic wasn't just food. It was architectural statement, chemical achievement, and social currency, all molded into a ring of savory jello that nobody asked for but everyone made. Betty Crocker dedicated 8 pages to tomato aspic in her 1950 cookbook, including diagrams for achieving perfect clarity and preventing layer separation. This was serious business. The tomato juice had to be seasoned just right. Too much Worcestershire and it was brown. Too little and it was bland. The gelatin ratio required precision. Too much and you were eating rubber. Too little and your aspic collapsed into soup at room temperature. The mold mattered more than the food. Copper fish molds, ceramic ring molds, individual flower shapes. The container communicated class. Betty's illustrations showed 37 different mold options, each with specific release techniques. Oil lightly with mayonnaise for easy unmolding became kitchen scripture. The woman with the most molds won, even if nobody ate what came out of them. But here's what nobody admits. Properly made tomato aspic was actually good. The acidity of tomato, the umami of Worcestershire, the brightness of lemon, all concentrated and chilled into something that cleansed your palate and felt sophisticated. It was gazpacho that held its shape. Bloody Mary you could slice. The presentation ritual was pure theater. You'd carry the mold to the table covered, build suspense, then lift to reveal the aspic standing free. That moment when everyone held their breath, waiting to see if it would hold or collapse into tomato-flavored failure. The garnish took another 20 minutes. Mayonnaise rosettes piped with professional precision, olive slices arranged like flowers, celery leaves placed, just so. My mother's friend Janet once brought an aspic to a funeral luncheon that was so perfect, so crystalline, with shrimp suspended at exact intervals like insects in amber, that nobody would eat it. It sat there, untouched, a monument to wasted effort. She took it home and threw it at her husband, who'd suggested she make something simple for the funeral. The divorce papers cited irreconcilable differences, but everyone knew it was about the aspic. Office lunches featured competitive aspic displays. Secretary pools would coordinate colors: red tomato Monday, green cucumber Tuesday, golden chicken Wednesday. The woman with the clearest aspic, the most perfect mold release, the most artistic garnish won unspoken victories in the suburban social wars. Mock oyster stew. Tastes just like the real thing, my grandfather lied through his teeth, spooning another mouthful of Betty Crocker's mock oyster stew. It was 1943. Real oysters were for rich people, and Grandma's eggplant version was all we were getting. He ate 3 bowls to prove his point, then spent the evening looking confused about what he'd just consumed. During the Depression, when real oysters were luxury and milk was barely affordable, Betty Crocker performed culinary alchemy, turning eggplant into convincing seafood. Mock oyster stew wasn't just economical substitution. It was gastronomic gaslighting at its finest. The deception was brilliant. Eggplant, cut into oyster-sized pieces and salted to draw out moisture, developed a slippery, briny texture eerily similar to actual oysters. Simmered in milk with butter, celery, and the crucial addition of soy sauce, it created a stew that fooled people who knew better. Betty's recipe came with psychological preparation. Serve without explanation. Allow guests to enjoy before revealing the economical secret. This wasn't just cooking instruction, it was social engineering. The recipe literally included lying by omission as a serving suggestion. Schools and hospitals adopted mock oyster stew because it solved multiple problems. Children who wouldn't eat vegetables ate oysters. The Catholic Church approved it for Friday meals. It counted as abstaining from meat while feeling like indulgence. Everyone was lying to everyone, and everyone was fine with it. My grandmother's church cookbook included her annotation, "Served this to Harold's boss." He asked for seconds in the recipe, never told him. He's still talking about my excellent oysters 20 years later. This wasn't just deception. It was a long con maintained through decades of dinner parties. Mock oyster stew disappeared when actual oysters became affordable and eggplant became trendy. We no longer needed to pretend vegetables were seafood, but something was lost: the creativity of constraint, the art of delicious deception. Creamed chipped beef on toast. My uncle came back from Korea in 1953 with two things: a Purple Heart and a violent hatred of creamed chipped beef. SOS, he'd mutter whenever Mom made it. Same old shit, but he'd eat 3 servings anyway, like he was punishing himself for surviving while better men didn't. Every veteran knows this dish by another name, but Betty Crocker transformed battlefield survival food into suburban comfort lunch. This was war rations dressed in white sauce, memories of mess halls disguised as home cooking. The beef came in glass jars, paper-thin slices of salt-cured meat that looked like edible leather and tasted like concentrated ocean. You'd rinse it, tear it into pieces, and fold it into white sauce, so thick you could spackle walls with it. This gray-beige slurry got poured over toast, preferably slightly stale for structural integrity. Betty's genius wasn't improving the recipe. It was impossible to improve. Instead, she recontextualized it. What was punishment in mess halls became comfort in home kitchens. She added suggestions: paprika for color, peas for the fiction of vegetables. These additions didn't help, but they made you feel like you were cooking. The dish had its own physics. The sauce cooled rapidly, congealing into paste. The toast grew soggy from bottom up. There was a 5-minute window between ready and ruined. You ate it fast, standing over the stove, or not at all. Office workers packed deconstructed versions. Toast in one container, beef mixture in a thermos, assembly at noon. The smell, salt, milk, and something indefinably military filled break rooms. Veterans would appear from nowhere, drawn by scent memory. "Haven't had SOS since Normandy," they'd say, then eat 2 servings while staring at nothing. My uncle eventually taught Mom the right way to make it, the way that reminded him least of Korea. More pepper, less salt, bread toasted darker, so you can taste something besides memories. He'd eat it once a month, always on a Tuesday, always alone, always with a beer that he'd nurse but never finish. Schools served it because it met every nutritional requirement while costing nothing. Protein, dried beef, dairy, white sauce, grain, toast, vegetable. The parsley garnish nobody ate. It looked like wallpaper paste, tasted like nostalgia, and filled stomachs for hours. Mock chicken salad. The summer of 1944, my grandmother served mock chicken salad at her wedding reception. Real chicken was impossible to get. The war took everything with feathers. But she made do with hard-boiled eggs and enough mayonnaise and denial to feed 50 guests. Nobody complained. Half the men were heading to Europe. This might be their last homemade meal. During World War II rationing, when real chicken was scarce, Betty Crocker invented a chicken salad that contained no chicken, no salad, and barely qualified as food. But mock chicken salad filled lunch sandwiches across America, proving that necessity and mayonnaise could make anything edible. The base was hard-boiled eggs, lots of them, chopped fine, mixed with enough mayonnaise to achieve spreadable consistency, then seasoned with poultry seasoning until your brain believed it was eating chicken. Celery added crunch. Pickle relish added tang. Yellow food coloring added the visual lie that this was somehow poultry-based. Betty's 1943 recipe included the note, "Seasoning is crucial for achieving authentic flavor." This was code for add enough sage and thyme that people stop asking questions. The texture work was masterful. Eggs chopped to varied sizes created the illusion of white and dark meat. Celery cut on the bias mimicked chicken's fibrous quality. Office workers brought mock chicken sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, the mayonnaise seeping through by lunch. Nobody discussed what they were eating. There was collective agreement to maintain the fiction. "Great chicken salad, Martha." "Thank you, Helen." Both knew, neither acknowledged. My grandmother kept making mock chicken salad after the war ended, after real chicken became plentiful. "It tastes like victory," she'd say, which made no sense unless you'd been there, unless you understood that sometimes lying about lunch meant believing in tomorrow. Tuna potato chip casserole. Mrs. Henderson brought tuna potato chip casserole to the 1957 church potluck and changed everything. Not because it was good, it was objectively terrible, but because she'd turned garbage into gold using only shelf-stable ingredients and audacity. Within a month, every housewife in town had their own version. Before it became ironic potluck humor, tuna potato chip casserole was Betty Crocker's answer to the working mother's prayer. Something hot, filling, and ready in 30 minutes, using only ingredients that never expired. The recipe read like a grocery store clearance rack. Canned tuna, cream of mushroom soup, frozen peas, and an entire bag of crushed potato chips. Layer, bake, serve. No fresh ingredients, no chef technique, no apologies. This was American convenience crystallized into casserole form. Betty introduced it in 1955 as Busy Day Tuna Bake, but everyone called it that thing with the chips on top. The genius was the potato chip crust. Not breadcrumbs, not crackers, but actual potato chips, transforming guilty snack food into legitimate recipe component. This was the moment America stopped pretending to have standards. The chemistry was perfect, despite itself. Chips provided salt and crunch. Soup added unctuousness. Tuna brought protein. Peas offered the fiction of vegetables. Together they created something greater than their shameful parts. A dish that tasted like childhood, even if your childhood predated its invention. Assembly required no skill, which was the point. Open cans, dump in dish, crush chips with your hands. The only fun part, sprinkle on top. The oven did everything else. 30 minutes later, golden bubbling proof that cooking didn't require cooking ability. My mother's bridge club had a tuna potato chip crisis in 1958. Everyone brought the same casserole to the potluck, having independently decided it was easy. 7 identical casseroles sat on the buffet table like a comment on suburban conformity. They ate all 7. Nobody complained. The recipe spawned infinite variations. Fritos instead of potato chips, salmon replacing tuna, cream of celery when mushroom ran out. Each family developed their own version, defended it vigorously, claimed it was completely different despite being functionally identical. Churches still serve tuna potato chip casserole at funerals. That specific Methodist comfort food that says, "We're sorry for your loss." Self-saucing, butterscotch. Pudding cake, self-saucing, butterscotch. Pudding cake was the dessert that seemed to defy physics, creating its own sauce while baking and delivering 2 desserts in one pan. This wasn't magic, though it seemed like it. This was clever technique that used the principles of heat and moisture to create something that looked impossible but tasted incredible. The cake batter was simple: flour, sugar, butter, and milk combined into a basic cake mixture that was spread in a buttered baking dish. The magic happened with the topping: brown sugar and cocoa powder for chocolate versions, or just brown sugar for pure butterscotch, were sprinkled evenly over the batter. Then hot water was poured carefully over the entire surface. The physics were beautiful. As the dessert baked, the cake batter rose to the top while the sugar and water mixture sank to the bottom, creating its own caramel sauce through the heat of the oven. What went in looking like a disaster came out as a perfect cake floating on a pool of rich butterscotch sauce. The serving was part of the spectacle. The cake was scooped from the pan, revealing the golden cake portion and the rich sauce underneath. Each serving got both components, creating a dessert that was warm, comforting, and completely satisfying. The cake was tender and moist, while the sauce was rich and buttery with deep caramel flavors. This dessert appeared at family dinners where something warm and comforting was needed, at potluck gatherings where impressive presentations mattered, and any time someone wanted to serve something that would generate conversation and requests for the recipe. Brown sugar dumplings. Brown sugar dumplings were the dessert that turned simple syrup into a vehicle for delivering pure comfort in dumpling form. This wasn't fruit cobbler or traditional dumplings. This was something uniquely American that combined the satisfaction of bread with the sweetness of candy. The syrup came first. Brown sugar, butter, and water cooked together until bubbling and smooth, creating a rich caramel base that would both flavor and cook the dumplings. Some families added a touch of vanilla or cinnamon to the syrup, while others preferred the pure, unadulterated taste of caramelized sugar. The dumpling dough was simple but crucial. Flour, sugar, baking powder, and milk combined into a soft dough that would steam rather than bake in the hot syrup. The dough was dropped by spoonfuls into the bubbling syrup, where it would cook through steam and heat, absorbing flavors while maintaining a tender, bread-like texture. The cooking process was almost meditative, watching the dumplings puff and cook in the golden syrup, filling the kitchen with aromas of caramelized sugar and warm bread. When done, the dumplings were tender and sweet, having absorbed syrup flavors throughout while maintaining their structure. This dessert was served warm, with the dumplings ladled from the pot, along with generous amounts of the rich syrup that had cooked them. Each bite delivered sweet, tender dumpling surrounded by buttery caramel sauce. It appeared at family dinners where comfort food was the goal, at church suppers where satisfying desserts were needed, and any time someone wanted to create something that felt like a warm hug in dessert form. Oatmeal pie. Oatmeal pie was the dessert that proved breakfast ingredients could create something worthy of the finest dinner parties. This wasn't oatmeal cookies in pie form. This was a rich custard-like creation that used oats to create textures and flavors that no traditional pie could match. The filling was where the magic happened. Oats were combined with eggs, corn syrup, brown sugar, and butter, creating a mixture that would set into something resembling pecan pie, but with its own unique character. The oats provided texture and nutty flavor while absorbing the sweet custard mixture during baking. Some versions included coconut or chopped nuts for additional texture, while others relied on the oats alone to provide interest. The key was balancing the liquid ingredients so the filling would set properly without becoming too dense or too loose. Vanilla extract was essential for rounding out the flavors and preventing the pie from tasting too much like actual oatmeal. The baking process transformed the simple ingredients into something elegant and sophisticated. The top developed a golden crust, while the interior remained creamy and rich, with the oats distributed throughout in a pattern that looked almost like pecan pie from a distance. The finished pie was rich, sweet, and surprisingly sophisticated, with a texture that was part custard, part cookie, and completely satisfying. It appeared at holiday tables where traditional desserts were expected, but something different was desired at potluck gatherings where unique contributions were valued, and any time someone wanted to prove that simple ingredients could create extraordinary results. Teas, ready for wartime genius? 24 to 30 are pure. How is that a dessert? Mayonnaise, chocolate cake. Mayonnaise, chocolate cake sounds like a mistake until you taste it, and then it becomes the chocolate cake recipe you'll never want to give up. This wasn't wartime desperation. This was pure genius disguised as necessity, creating the moistest, richest chocolate cake anyone had ever experienced, using an ingredient that seemed completely wrong, but was absolutely perfect. The science was beautiful, even if people didn't understand it at the time. Mayonnaise is essentially eggs and oil emulsified together, which meant this cake was getting perfectly blended fats and proteins without any of the work of creaming butter or separating eggs. The mayonnaise dissolved completely into the batter, leaving no trace of its origin, but contributing moisture and richness that traditional methods couldn't match. The batter looked wrong to anyone watching. Thin, almost too liquid, with that slight tang from the mayonnaise that seemed like it would ruin everything. But experienced bakers knew to trust the process, watching as the oven transformed this unlikely mixture into something that rose perfectly and filled the kitchen with the most incredible chocolate aroma. The finished cake was revelation in every bite, moist beyond belief, with a crumb so tender it practically melted on the tongue, and a chocolate flavor that was pure and intense, without any competing flavors. The mayonnaise had done its job completely, contributing everything good about eggs and oil while disappearing entirely from the taste profile. This cake appeared at gatherings where people expected ordinary chocolate cake and got something extraordinary instead. Requests for the recipe were always met with disbelief, then demands for proof, then conversion. It represented the kind of innovation that happened when limitations forced creativity, proving that sometimes the most unlikely ingredients created the most memorable results. Wacky, crazy cake. Wacky cake earned its name honestly. This was a cake that broke every rule of traditional baking and somehow created something better than recipes that followed all the proper techniques. No eggs, no butter, no milk, no mixing bowls, and definitely no logic that any traditional baker could understand. In an era when baking was considered a precise science, requiring expensive ingredients and careful technique, this recipe proved that chaos could create perfection. The method was as crazy as the name suggested. Flour, sugar, cocoa powder, baking soda, and salt were mixed directly in the baking pan, no separate bowl required. Then 3 wells were made in the dry ingredients, and into these went vegetable oil, white vinegar, and vanilla extract. Water was poured over everything, and the whole mixture was stirred right in the pan until just combined. The sight of this preparation horrified traditional bakers who had spent years learning proper creaming methods and careful incorporation techniques. The chemical reaction was what made this cake work. The vinegar and baking soda created the leavening, while the oil provided moisture and richness. The lack of eggs meant the cake had a unique texture, tender but sturdy, moist but not dense, with a chocolate flavor that was clean and pure. The acid-base reaction happened instantly when the vinegar hit the baking soda, creating bubbles that would lift the cake during baking without any need for beaten eggs or creamed butter. The beauty of this method was its foolproof nature. There was no way to overbeat the batter because there was barely any mixing involved. No risk of curdled butter or deflated eggs because neither ingredient was present. No worry about ingredient temperatures because everything went in at room temperature. Children could make this cake successfully, and busy mothers could throw it together in minutes when unexpected company arrived. The baking process was completely different from traditional cakes. This batter was thinner, more like thick liquid than traditional cake batter, but it rose beautifully and baked into something that looked completely normal from the outside. The real surprise came with the first bite. This wrong cake tasted absolutely right. The crumb was incredibly tender. The moisture was perfect. and the chocolate flavor was pure and intense without any competing elements. Wacky cake became famous during the Depression and World War II when traditional ingredients were scarce or expensive, but it remained popular long after prosperity returned because it was simply better than many traditional chocolate cakes. Rationing had forced innovation, and that innovation had produced something superior to what abundance had created. It proved that sometimes throwing out the rule book led to the best discoveries, and that necessity truly was the mother of invention. Tomato soup cake. Tomato soup cake was the dessert that made people question everything they thought they knew about baking, then made them believers with the first bite. This wasn't a savory cake or some weird experiment. This was legitimate spice cake that used condensed tomato soup to create moisture, color, and subtle flavor complexity that traditional ingredients couldn't match. Campbell's Soup Company actually promoted this recipe, understanding that creative uses for their products would increase sales during tough economic times. The soup wasn't just thrown into regular cake batter. The entire recipe was built around working with this unconventional ingredient. The tomato soup provided liquid, some sweetness, and a slight acidity that would react with the baking soda to create perfect texture. Spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves were essential for creating the familiar spice cake flavor profile while masking any hint of tomato. The soup's consistency was perfect for cake batter. Thick enough to provide structure, liquid enough to create moisture. The transformation was remarkable to witness. The soup, which smelled distinctly of tomatoes and herbs in the can, became something entirely different when combined with sugar and spices. The tomato flavor didn't disappear. It transformed into a subtle complexity that enhanced the other flavors without being identifiable. The natural umami in the tomatoes actually improved the overall taste profile, adding depth that traditional spice cakes often lacked. The base was simple but genius. Chocolate chips or chocolate candy melted until smooth and glossy. Into this chocolate went chow mein noodles, those crispy, crunchy noodles that added texture and visual interest that no traditional cookie ingredient could match. Some families added peanuts or other nuts for extra crunch and flavor. The mixture was stirred until every noodle was coated with chocolate, then spooned onto waxed paper in small mounds that resembled tiny haystacks. As the chocolate cooled and hardened, it bound the noodles together into clusters that were part candy, part cookie, and completely addictive. The finished haystacks had a unique texture that combined the smoothness of chocolate with the crunch of noodles, creating something that was satisfying to eat and fun to look at. The chocolate provided richness, while the noodles added textural interest that kept each bite interesting. These appeared at bake sales, where they always sold first, at holiday cookie exchanges, where they stood out from traditional offerings, and any time someone needed to make a lot of treats quickly. They represented American creativity at its finest, taking ingredients from completely different culinary traditions and combining them into something new and wonderful.